Welcome you all to English lectures, and today's lecture concerns the very first chapter from grade 12's book Heritage of Words, and that is Grandmother by Ray Young Beer. Before venturing into the poetry, what we should know is a slight bit of background about the Red Indian people. What happened to the Red Indian people in their own land when these white immigrants or the white Europeans came to their land in search of prosperity and richness. These days, whenever America, this word hits our head, we think it to be the land of white people, but it was not so. Millennia before the arrival of these Europeans in the land of America, in the continent of North America, there the native indigenous people walked the valleys, fashioned the culture and language, and painted the caves. After a generation of Christopher Columbus's arrival in the continent, Europeans started migrating to the continent. They migrated with their ships full of horses and guns, and in their heart, they were very much determined to tame the land, to rule over the indigenous people there, and to get the land. They were very much determined to do so. What followed is the struggle for about 400 years before the sun set in the dominions of Native Americans forever. They wasted these native indigenous Americans with the diseases, slavery, torture, and war. Established their rule there. They imposed their way of life. They imposed their language. They imposed their education system upon these Red Indians. And finally, these Red Indians were snatched of their identity. They were snatched of their cultural robes. So these white Europeans are the culprits who did not pay respect to the values and norms of these Red Indian people. They were forced to assimilate the European whites' lifestyle, and this resulted into the loss of identity of these Red Indian. It was the land of native indigenous people like the Meskwaki, Chicana, right? These were the people who used to dwell there. But these people are now marginalized by these white Europeans who came to their land centuries ago. Okay, so this is the background. Now let's get into the poetry itself. And before getting into the poetry, a few words on poet himself. Now our poet, who is from the Meskwaki tribe, it is one of the recognized Red Indian tribes, and he belongs to that tribe called Meskwaki tribe. Now he was born in 1950 in Marshalltown, Iowa. He's an American poet as well as a novelist, and he writes in two languages. His first language or the primary language is Meskwaki, that is his mother tongue, and his second language or the secondary language that he uses is English. And almost every time his writings come up with a recurring theme. And what is the theme that recurs in his writings? That is the theme of American Indian search for identity. As we already discussed, Europeans migrated or came to the land of these indigenous people, and they took away the land. Along with the land, they imposed their rules, they imposed their way of life, and snatched away the identity. Now Red Indianness do not survive as it was in the era before the European arrival. So Red Indian identity is at loss, and most of his writing comes with this theme of American Indian search for identity. Not only the theme of search for identity is there, but also painful awareness of identity loss is also embedded in his writings. And there is no word for poem in Meskwaki language. So our author created his own word for the poem. And what he means by that word is, poem is the concentration of the bigger meaning. Bigger meaning is concentrated into smaller form, but with the same essence. Like you have a big sheet of tablecloth, you fold it down, right? You fold it down and keep it, then it becomes small, right? It is comparatively reduced in the size. Now in that fold you will see different layers, right? So on, he says that my poetries are also like those folds. These poetries have various different levels of meanings, and these poetries are the concentrated form of the greater idea. The greater idea is represented in by a very short sentences and very strong imageries. So what he does to talk about the greater ideas in his poetry, he shortens it down. So he weighs the words, he weighs the imageries and symbols he uses, and he puts it in his poetry. So his poetries comes in a various different folds of meaning, and this poetry too, if we decode it through the perspective of a Native American, or say indigenous American or Red Indian, we come to understand a very different meaning than that of the meaning you get reading it through the perception of non-Native Americans. So we are going to read this poem from both of these lenses. The first perspective would be from the lens of non-native speakers. Let's read the poem. If I were to see her shape from a mile away, I would know so quickly that it would be her, the purple scarf and the plastic shopping bag. So now in the very first part of the poetry, what our poet says is, if he is to see her shape from a mile away, even from a distance, he would instantly recognize, he is going to recognize, he will definitely recognize that it is his grandmother who is with the purple scarf on the head and a plastic shopping bag. So what is he doing here is, he is painting the picture of a grandmother, and he is letting us know what is that grandmother like. So in the first part, what we see is he is drawing the outline of the grandmother. What his grandmother looked like. He is appealing to our eyes. He is giving us the visual perception. He is giving us the sense of sight. He is letting us see the appearance of the grandmother in the first part. Even if silhouette is visible, he is able to recognize that as a grandmother. And this grandmother word itself says us that the lady is old. Now let's come to the second part and see what he says. If I felt hands on my head, I would know that those were her hands, warm and damp with the smell of roots. Now he is assigning the qualities to that grandmother. What he says is, whenever, if he feels the hand on the head, he would instantly know that those hands are her hands. Why? Because those hands are warm and with the smell of the roots. Now what does he mean here? What is he doing here? He is attributing the qualities to this grandmother. What is this grandmother like? This grandmother has a warm hand. What do you mean by warm? Warm is a symbol for love. Right? He is now letting us feel the grandmother. He showed us the grandmother in the first part. In the second part, he is letting us touch the grandmother. He is evoking our somatosensory perception. He is evoking the sense of touch. In the second part, we embrace the grandmother. And which touch is warm? The touch with the love is warm, right? And we know the touch of intimate person. To whom we are intimate, we know the touch of those person. We don't know the touch of a stranger. Or do you know the touch of a stranger? No, no one knows the touch of a stranger. That touch is cold. There are various different types of touch. Cold touch, right? If I hit you, that cannot be the warm touch, right? Warm touch is of hug, love, affection, right? When you embarrass someone full of heart, right? Then that's the warm touch. Here, after painting the picture of a grandmother, showing us the image of a grandmother, he is letting us embrace the grandmother. And here, in the same part, what he does is he also let us smell the grandmother. Whose scent you know properly? You know the scent of those people who are very close to you, who share intimate relationship with you. You do not know the scent of people who do not share the intimate relationship with you. So this intimacy is presented here. He is letting us touch the grandmother and he is letting us smell the grandmother. So here in the second part, what he is doing is he is actually evoking the perception of touch, the somatosensory perception, as well as the olfactory sense is also provoked here or evoked here, right? So the sense of smell and sense of touch, what it feels like to touch the grandmother, what it feels like to smell when that scent of grandmother comes to the nose, what it feels. He is mentioning that, what grandmother smells like and what grandmother feels when touching. So after letting us see the grandmother, he is letting us touch and hug the grandmother, embrace the grandmother by evoking our somatosensory perception and the olfactory perception. Let's see what he does in the third part. If I heard a voice coming from the rock, I would know, and her words would flow inside me like the light of someone stirring ashes from a sleeping fire at night. Here what he means, when he heard a voice coming from the rock. Now what does this mean? Voice coming from the rock. When is rock placed above you? It is only placed when you die. When you are in the tomb, above you lies the tombstone, right? So this indicates us that his grandmother is already dead. She has died, she passed away, she is no more in this world, right? But still, if the voices comes out from that rock, if the voice comes from that tomb, he would instantly feel that those voices flowing inside him like the light, right? So here he is evoking our auditory perception. He is relating, he is letting us hear the grandmother whose voice is inaudible in the present scenario, and that can only come from the grave. Now he is here letting us listen to the voices from the grandmother, and he says that I would know and her words would flow inside me like the light. What does this mean? Now, if we carry on the scientific test related to DNA, then what we find is the DNA of a grandparents and the children are similar. The grandchild are similar. Why are they similar? Because grandmother is inside the grandchild and grandchild is inside the grandmother. So he is saying that voice there is not just the voice there, it is actually, it flows inside me. Whatever I am speaking, whatever I am now, it is all that grandmother of the past. This speech, whatever I speak, is fashioned by that grandmother. And And in real life also, in few of his interviews, Ray Young Beer has said that he was very close to his grandmother from his mother's side, the maternal grandmother. And this grandmother gave him the knowledge of mythology of their one Red Indian myths, right? She taught her the myths, poetries, and all the languages. So this grandmother, the image always frequently keeps on repeating in his literature. And he said that these voices are somewhat of the grandmother. Here what he means, everything, his body is fashioned by grandmother, his voice is fashioned by grandmother, his way of life is fashioned by grandmother. So whatever grandmother has taught, whatever grandmother has given, or whatever he has accumulated as a four meanings from the grandmother, that is what being presented by him these days. So it means he is inside the grandmother as grandmother is inside him. Here he also means that physical separation cannot separate the platonic love that he shares with his grandmother. The separation, the destruction of a body is not able to destroy the grandmother that is within him. So he is actually the product that the grandmother has made, right? Would flow inside me like the light. And now after that, what he does is light of someone steering ashes from a sleeping fire at night. Now he is nostalgic. He remembers, he goes visits back to the vistas of memory of his earlier days, where he sees his grandmother in the midnight getting out, going to the fire, sitting there and stirring the ashes. When you leave the fire for a longer time, these coals gets covered by the ashes, right? And heat mellows down, heat deteriorates down, right? The intensity of heat degrades, and once you remove the ashes, then you get that heat back again. So grandmother to wake up in the night and walk out or walk to the fire so that she can remove the ashes from the fire, so that the family can regain the heat, right? In the chilled, cold midnight. So here he is visiting back to the grandmother who used to make them comfortable with her love, right? She wakes up in the midnight, steers the ashes away from the fire, removes the ashes from the fire, and so that the family members would get heat. So in this way, what we see here is a love of grandmother and the grandson, where grandson is missing his grandmother and is nostalgic. Here we see his feeling of love, empathy, he is very affectionate towards grandmother, and also we see the feeling of nostalgia where he is missing his grandmother, right? So this is what we decode if we read it from the perspective of non-Native Americans who do not know the history of Red Indians. So if in the first reading, through the lens of non-natives, we see the love of a grandmother and a grandchild. A grandchild's love towards his grandmother, where in the first part he paints the picture of the grandmother, draws the outline of the grandmother, tell us about her scarf and shopping bag. In the second part he comes and let us embrace the grandmother so that we know the touch and the smell of the grandmother. He is letting us be close to the grandmother. And in the third part what he says is, like the DNA alike in grandmother and grandchild, this soul, this voice of mine is of the grandmother. She has fashioned this voice. So grandmother is inside me and I am inside the grandmother. And he after that visits earlier days where he finds his grandmother when everyone is asleep in their tents. He finds his grandmother stirring the ashes so that to regain the heat, so that her children could sleep in a cozy, warm environment, right? So this is the first thing that we decode while reading through the perspective of non-native. Now let's read this through the perspective of Native American. As I already mentioned that our author writes about the search of identity. Red Indians search for identity, and at the same time his poems also portrays his awareness, a very painful awareness about the identity loss. So let's read this and try to decode through the perspective of a Native American, indigenous American. What meaning would they decipher when they read? Okay, let's start it again. If I were to see her safe from miles away, I would know quickly that it would be her, the purple scarf and the plastic shopping bag. See here, what he is saying, if he sees the grandmother from a distance, he would instantly recognize that is his grandmother with the scarf and the plastic shopping bag. Now, if you have observed this Native American Red Indian people, they do not have a scarf on their head. Rather, it's made up of feathers and other things. I don't know what you exactly say that, but they have something else in their head. And this plastic bag is the plastic comes with the modernity. Right? Plastic is a modern phenomenon. So now, what is he doing? He is talking about the grandmother, Red Indian grandmother, but at the same time, he is not placing the traditional thing that they used to have on their head. Rather, he is placing the scarf on her head, and her hands are with the plastic shopping bag. What does this mean? What does this mean? Here, what he means, this is not the exact image or say the stereotypical image of a traditional Meskwaki grandmother, right? So what is he trying to say? As I already told you, he is very much aware about the loss of identity. Here, he is talking about this loss of identity because his grandmother is the Red Indian, but whatever she have put on herself or on her body is not the Red Indian entities. These are the entities of the modern world, right? So what he means here is, though we cannot gain our real identity as it was in the earlier epochs, it has been modified. People of the earlier days, people few generations ahead him or people preceding him, not the people in the distant generation, but people very close to the very near generations preceding him, have already assimilated the Europeanness, and now that originality that Red Indians shared once or carried once cannot be replicated as it is. It has been already modified by the European costumes assimilation by these Red Indians. So what he mean to say here is the identity, the quest, the originality is there, but even that originality somehow has been with the elements of these European people, the scarf and the plastic shopping bag. These are not the entities from the Red Indian tribe, right? These are the entities from the European culture. So what he means to say that our culture, if we want to revive our identity, we should revive it, but our identity, our culture is not there as it was in the earlier epochs, which was there before the Europeans arrived. It is not as it was. But after the European arrival, the generations with the 4 centuries of struggle have somewhat modified. They have somewhat assimilated into the ways of Europeans. They have taken few of their entities, and now those entities cannot be separated from Red Indianness. The identity has been somewhat changed, and that we need to accept. So here we see his awareness about the loss of identity. So this is his very painful awareness about the loss of identity. Some portion of our identity, some portion of our culture, some fragments from our tradition have been eradicated. They are lost and they cannot be regained back. This is the loss that he is aware of. And to indicate this loss of American identity, he did not give the attributes of the stereotypical Red Indian grandmother. Rather, he gave her the scarf and the plastic shopping bag. And let's come down to the second part. If I felt hands on my head, I would know that those were her hands, warm and damp with the smell. If I feel the hands on my head, I would know that those hands are of hers, because it is warm and damp with the smell of root. Now warm, why warm? Because these Europeans have a habit of saying old folks to their parents, but these Red Indian people, the indigenous people of America, these people used to live in a commune. They have very stronger communal bonds. They put utmost importance to the family. They put utmost importance to relations. They live in community. They share the warm relationship. They are not the Europeans. They are not like the Europeans saying dead fox to their or the old fox to their father and mother. They don't get separated easily. Individual decisions do not make sense in their commune, in the Native American commune. Rather, it was whole commune. The commune was together. The commune was working for each other. The commune used to take care of each other. Individuals were for the commune. This bond of family, this intimacy between the community is reflected through his word warm. And now another phrase, damp with the smell of roots. What this means is these indigenous Americans or the Red Indians, their culture share the animistic view. They were shaman people. Now what animism means is these people worshipped stones, rivers, prairies, hills. These people worshipped the elements of the nature. For them, animistic view, this animation or animistic view, what it means is when you attribute the living qualities to the non-living entities. Like if I say the cloud is crying, if I say the stone is sitting, if I say the wind is running, what am I doing? Wind, stone, these are the non-living entities. But by making a wind run, stone sit, I am attributing the living qualities to them, right? So in the same way, these people used to attribute lively, living characteristics to the elements of nature and worship them as a god. This is called the animistic view. For them, the every elements of nature were god. Now they don't have this European mindset where people see oneself different and distinct from the nature. What Europeans mindset says is we are above the nature and we are the master of the nature and we are the one who are going to tame the nature, control it and use it in our benefit. But these Red Indians did not share this view. They thought themselves, they considered themselves as the part of the nature. They did not consider themselves above the nature, the master of the nature. Rather, they consider themselves the slave of the nature. They consider themselves the part of the nature who have to function in a chain with other animals, plants and other biotic and abiotic substances of the nature. So here we see these people putting priority or these people emphasizing the nature more, right? But what Europeans mindset emphasize? They emphasize the man first. They are anthropocentric. But these people are centered, rooted to the nature. And this smell from her hands, that means, that is indicating, hinting towards this shaman culture, towards the animistic view these Red Indians share, towards their closeness with the nature. So whenever he gets the smell of that grandmother, it is the smell is of the roots, right? Why roots? That is the groundness, that is the originality, the closeness with the nature, right? The harmony with the nature. This is the central core of Native American philosophy. So he brought this image of the root to indicate this trait of Red Indian people. After this, what he says, if I heard a voice coming from a rock, if I heard a voice coming from a rock, and her words would flow inside me like the light of someone stirring ashes from a sleeping fire at night. What he means here? Rock. See again, it's again the metaphor for tomb, right? So rock is above and below there is a dead person. Now what are these rocks if we observe it through the perspective of Red Indians? These rocks are the misdoings by the Europeans which has superseded the Red Indianness. These rocks are the rocks of war, disease, torture that Europeans brought with them, right? These rocks are the pain the Red Indians endured before the sun finally set in their dominion forever. Europeans imposed certain rules. They fought war. They massacred their population. They brought all the diseases into their reservations and wiped them out. See, these misdoings are the rocks under which the Red Indian is lying. The Red Indian is suppressed. These Europeans imposed the rule of language. These Europeans imposed the political rules and social rules in the land of America, naming it United States of America, right? So this is the heavy rock of European misdoings under which the Red Indianness is suppressed. So now what he is saying, that if he hears this voice coming from that rock, and her words would flow inside me like the light of someone. Okay. Now those words will flow inside him. Why? He is himself the Red Indian. The gene in him is the Red Indian. The language he speaks is the Meskwaki. So what he says that those voices which are suppressed by the European misdoings, by the misdoings of European whites, are my voices. I feel those voices are from inside me, flowing inside me. That means he is the Red Indian. He have this predicament too, and he also have the awareness of loss of identity. He have the pain and a desire to relieve the pain. Both is in him, right? So those voices coming down from the rock are his voices, because he is the Red Indian himself. He is the Native American himself, right? His body, his face, his skin color, the color of his hair are not like those that of European whites. Rather, they are all Indian. So he is saying that those voices are not different from me. Those are my voices. The voices of the people who endured those sufferings, who are down under the grave, those all voices are of mine. Here he is relating himself to the Red Indian tribe, to his one tribe, of someone stirring ashes from a sleeping fire at night. Now here we see the beautiful imagery. You know the coal, right? When you leave the coal burning, then what happens? After some time, the ash covers the coal. There the heat fades away. The heat gets deteriorated. It's weakened, right? The intensity of the heat weakens, and now it is covered by the ash. And now once you remove the ash, you will find the spark in the coal. When you remove the ash, you will regain the heat, right? So he is again hinting to the same thing. See what has happened. We as a red Indian have put on the costume of these European whites. I am with the tie, shirt, I speak English language. These are all the ashes that has been accumulated, right? If we remove that, inside there comes the heat, the redness, right? That is the red Indian. The fire is red. So European misdoings, the cultures, the language, the costume, the way of life, whatever these red Indians have assimilated, these needs to be removed. What is the color of the ash? It's grey, slightly white. And what is the color of the fire, that coal? It's the red, right? Black, and then when it glows, it's red. So he is saying that ash needs to be removed to get the fire back. That means to get the red Indianness back, this ash needs to be removed. So he is getting the image of grandmother removing the ashes. That means they are removing the cultural clothings that Europeans imposed upon the red Indians, right? When they created this state called United States of America. So here we see that grandmother is the epitome of red Indianness, right? And this red Indianness, the epitome itself, is with the scarf and the plastic shopping bag. That means something had changed. We cannot revive it in its original form. But whatever we revive is that of the red Indian. So we need to get the ashes out. You clean the ashes, what you get is the red hot glowing fire. So remove this cultural dress. Just shed away the cultural clothings that European whites imposed upon the red Indians. Then what we get inside is the red Indian. Definitely he is aware about the loss of identity. At the same time, he is very hopeful, very optimistic that the identity can be regained. So here he comes up with this metaphor of sleeping fire. We leave the fire for the whole night. We think the fire is dead, right? But early in the morning you go and remove the ashes. The heat will be there. There will be, if you don't find the whole fire, even you are capable to find a small spark of it, the red spark, that would ignite the whole fire again. That is what he means. See the color, ashes above the coal, something like a whitish grey, and the color of the burning coal, that's red. They are the red Indian, and these ashes are the white people who have covered the red Indian, who have superseded the red Indian, who have overwhelmed the red Indian, and now the red Indian has vanished inside their envelope, right? So now he is saying to remove this covering, steering the ashes from the fire. Now what does that mean? Just remove the ashes, the redness will come out again, right? So this is how we see this poem from two different perspectives. Perspective of non-native, we find a beautiful love and nostalgia. We find the affection and veneration of a grandchild towards his grandmother. And when we put on a lens of a red Indians, what we see is the loss of identity and also the hope to regain that identity. Beside this, what we need to know is, why is he using this conditional statement, if plus would? This is to indicate the impossibility of the situation. Grandmother cannot come back after being dead, and the red Indianness also, the red Indian identity also, which died centuries ago, that red Indianness is also impossible to be revived again, right? In the original form as it was, only the remnants are there. So what he is meaning by these, the conditional statement if and would, is he is indicating to the impossibility of the situation. First, from the perspective of a grandchild, a dead grandmother cannot come. That is the impossible situation. So if this happens, why is he saying that? He is saying that to speculate the imagination imaginary situation, right? If I see, he is never going to see the grandmother because she is already asleep down under the ground, right? So he is never going to see that grandmother. If I see, I would recognize. Imaginary situation is being speculated. If I hear the voice, again the imaginary situation is being speculated. And now from the perspective of Red Indians, the rule, say now the America being the global power and talking about the democracy and snatching away the freedom of their own people. Now no one is going to speak against America and help Red Indians get their identity, and even the voice of Red Indians are not sufficient enough to let the central federal government chafe their ears, right? So now this is also impossible. Identity has been lost and gaining is very hard. So in both ways, the dead grandmother cannot come back. The lost identity cannot be regained in its original form. Some things are lost in the ashes in the fire, right? You don't get the coal as it was before the burning, right? So in the same way, what he means here is there is a loss of identity, and the total revival, the 100% revival of that original identity is very impossible. So to indicate the impossibility of the situation, he is using the sentence structure that is used to speculate the imaginary situation. Rather, he is creating his own imaginary situation. Beside that if we come to notice is the use of small letters in the beginning of the sentence. You see, if starts with a small I, and again it ends in a plus her, and the purple scarf, this the T is also small. His sentences do not begin with the capital letter. Why is he doing that? See, capital is prominent. Whatever is capital, you see it, right? It's big, right? And he is indicating the small stature of these Red Indians. He is indicating the marginalized status of Red Indian in America with the small letters. With the small letters, he is saying that Red Indians were big in antiquity, in a distant time. But today, Red Indians are very small. They are in minority. They are marginalized. So this status of being marginalized, being in minority, and being with the feeble voice is portrayed through his use of small letters. Okay, so this is how he plays question answer. The first question is, what images do you find in the poem written by the member of the Sauk and Fox Meskwaki Indian tribe of North America? To what sense do these images appeal? Now, what are the first images that we discover in the book, in the poem? Is the first is the shape of a person, and then the scarf and the plastic bag. Now these are the images we discover. To which sense these images appeal? These images appeal to our eyes. They appeal to the visual sense. They appeal to the perception of sight. Secondly, we come to notice the images like hands on head, warm. These images appeal to our skin. These images appeal to somatosensory perception. And thirdly, we come to the smell of roots on our hands, right? So this smell of roots appeal to our olfactory sense. It appeals to our sense of smell. And thirdly, what we see is the voice coming from the rock. Now it's appealing to our ears. Voice, rock, these are the images there, right? And finally, we see the images related to movement and position. Flow of light inside me. Inside my position, inside me, this is another position, right? And we see other steering. At midnight, someone is sitting by the sleeping fire, the fire that is being extinguished, and is steering the ashes there. We see the sense, we find the sense of position and the movement. This is called the kinesthetic sense. So here in the final part, what he is doing is he is evoking our kinesthetic perception. Okay, so these are appealing to the kinesthetic sense. He is letting us see the grandmother, he is letting us touch the grandmother, he is letting us smell the grandmother, and he is also letting us know that that grandmother is embedded within me, like the gene itself, right? So now, after this we have a second question. How does a speaker feel toward his grandmother? In what words or lines do he make his feelings clear? Okay, what he feels about his grandmother. He has the feeling of love towards the grandmother. That love can be seen. I would know so quickly. Whom you know so quickly? Whom you recognize so quickly? The person you love, the person with whom you are very close, right? So this portrays the love. We also see the adoration, right? Flows, veneration, worship, right? Adoration means worship, veneration, deep respect and love. So we see his feelings towards his grandmother. What are the feelings he poses for the grandmother? It's the feeling of love, it's the feeling of adoration, even he have the feeling empathy. What he can place himself in grandmother's position. Whenever I hear the voice from the rock, I would know it's flow inside me. See, he is placing himself in the position of a grandmother. Whatever voice grandmother utters, that is inside him, right? So he is able to understand the mental status of grandmother. That means there is a feeling of empathy too. Empathy means when one person is able to stand on the shoe of the other person. When I am able to understand the emotional and mental status of the other person, then I am empathic to that person. So this is empathy, is understanding the grandmother. And we see the nostalgic feeling too. Why nostalgic? Because he is revisiting that place. That was the grandmother in a living form, in her originality, was what he enjoyed. Today that is lost and he is visiting back to the time when that was full, that was not lost, right? That was there in its physical body. So we see these different types of feelings. The feelings of love, feeling of veneration, say adoration, the feeling of empathy is there, and also the feeling of nostalgia is there. What are the words? Those words are sentences indicating these feelings. We see in the very first part, I would know so quickly, right? And also I felt, I know, right? Flow inside me. These are the words which are letting us know his feeling. So that's all for this poetry. Thank you.